Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Purpose of Money podcast. Today we are with Bob Grant and we're going to talk about relationships and money. So stay tuned. This is going to be a good one. Bob Grant is a clinically trained relationship expert, podcaster, and best-selling author of Women Men Adore. He's the founder of Relationship Headquarters, where he specializes in helping women emotionally connect with a man, attract true love, and if they want to, get married. And for those in a relationship, get unstuck and begin connecting as a couple. I am super excited to have this conversation with Bob because he's the relation expert and I'm the money expert. And y'all know that relationships and money does not always mix. Bob, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Gwen. It's nice to be here.
Yes, this is exciting because I am so grateful you reached out to me to actually share your platform. And I just went diving into your website and I love what you have and what you offer. So we'll get into that. But before we get started, I have to ask you one of my signature questions, which is what was money like for you when you were growing up?
So I was fortunate. My father was a physician and he didn't really care a lot about things. And so for him, money was more about safety. And I always felt like we had a lot, but it wasn't just given out to us. So we were taught to work. And probably the biggest thing that I learned is that we were not allowed to quit something once we started. And that served me so well. And so when I think about money things, we didn't go into debt. It wasn't modeled for me, and it was more of a necessity than anything else. And if you had extra, you just saved it. And being around that, I felt like I was really blessed that I didn't have the ups and downs of family income that would be great one month and be scarce the next.
Absolutely. I can co-sign that. When you have good examples in your life and you have parents who push you, you always are better off for it. So I agree, you were totally blessed because some people experience different things in their childhood when it comes to their relationship with money. So that's really interesting. And I like the fact that you're, transparent that your father pursued a profession that kind of allows for that too. But there are also a lot of physicians who nowadays have so much student loan debt that there's not always extra. So it's good to see that there was a balance in your household. So let's get into your expertise because everyone is always asking me about what should they do in their relationship, especially when it comes to money. So I want to start off with talking about some of your experiences with your clients and what was the biggest thing that women misunderstand about men when it comes to relationships?
So a lot of the ladies I talk with are professionals, and they feel that the man expects them to be equal with everything. It's from paying to a date, paying for a date to as far as trips or anything, as though men keep score like that. And I remind them a lot of time is, for us, for men, is that the money we make, it's not just a status thing, but it's a reflection of who we are. It's an accomplishment, and that men in general like to be generous, not necessarily like tons of money per se, but we like making a woman happy. And so the men don't keep score like sometimes women think, or usually they've had an experience where someone did keep score, but that's more the outlier. That's more of an injury with the man, that everything has to be fair and even. And that, that their success isn't something to hide or to shrink away from. The men I know, good for you if you're doing well. I mean, that doesn't take away from my success because you're successful.
That's very interesting. And I've actually never thought about that. I definitely know women who are in relationships where someone is always trying to split the bill 50-50 or
Hmm.
come to the table with your portion, but I've never really thought about keeping score versus being generous, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a really good point. So that's helpful, especially from a man's perspective. My husband is super generous in general and he shows his love through affection and gifts, right? Like gift giving. So in my mind, I just thought that was him, right? And how he is.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of cool to think, hey, that probably is a lot of men
Mm-hmm.
who want to, make sure that their partner is happy. So I really like that. You say men need to feel women's emotions to fall in love. This is something I learned going through some of your content, and I wanted to know, what does that mean?
So for us, when we talk about generous, and I was thinking about your husband when you said this, is that if I do something for you as a man, what I'm looking for is your reaction that I did a good job, that I get validated, not necessarily a pat on the head, but if I'm doing something that doesn't make you happy, if I can't be your hero, okay, that's fine if you say thank you, or that's fine if you just nod your head, but that's not what I'm after. As a man, I can go make more money. I mean, I can work harder, but what I can't do is go down to Walmart and order the reaction I get from you when I took us to a restaurant that you really liked.
Mm.
And I hear women that will say, "Oh, I felt it, but I kept it inside." And well, how is he supposed to know how much you like it? I say, "Well, I said thank you." I said, "Yeah, but thank you is what you say to the Uber driver. It's not bad. It's just there's no connection there." And so when he feels that, because that's something we don't feel unless we're in the presence of a woman. I mean,
Mm.
it stirs that part of us up, which is my guess why your husband likes doing it for you, is because like you're smiling now, that reaction he gets.
Yeah, I think that's it. But I think that's human. I mean, I
Mhm.
personally, anyone who knows me, they know I'm an experienced person. And so when I have the smallest things, from a dinner party to a birthday party, I always make it an experience you won't forget, right? And it doesn't mean I spend a whole bunch of money. Sometimes it means I provide entertainment that you've never seen before, or conversations you've never had before. But I always like it to really touch people. And so they're talking about it like over and over again from that day forward, right? So I get that. And I think for men, it's probably even more sensitivity around it, because they're always trying to, do right by their partners. And so they like that affirmation. But I have to admit, I am someone who seeks that too. And it's not always, it shouldn't always be your driving factor to do something great or do something well, but it definitely helps when you execute in excellence and then you also get the affirmation from the person who enjoyed it. So I totally understand that and can relate to that even as a woman. So that's really good. That's really helpful. I do have a question though, because you work with a lot of professional women. I, have a business now, but I was in a professional leadership position with the government for 15 years. And I was fortunate to have my partner, right? But I definitely saw a lot of women who were successful and single. So, my question to you is, how can successful women find love without their career getting in the way? Do you ever coach people through those types of scenarios?
Yes, I hear that often, and I think some of it's based on a myth or either experiences that I have to pick one or the other. And I've had some clients that were physicians, some attorneys also, and they would say, "Oh, it's my success that really gets in the way." And I said, "Well, I don't know that men care as much. I mean, the dirty secret is most men don't really care as far as what a woman does. It doesn't mean they don't like it, but as far as from a status standpoint, is that something they dream of? Not as much. It doesn't mean they can't be appreciative or admire what she does, but it's sometimes I've had women that will, like what doctors do sometimes, they'll take their job home with them. And so the same attitude they have at work, focused, maybe competitive, maybe really driven, that comes across a relationship as being competitive, whether they realize it or not. So one of the things we talk about is just a subtle shift, not all the time, and not changing who you are, but it's the same type shift I would tell one client that was a doctor, and he would go home and he would take that doctor mentality with him. And I would say, your wife doesn't like that. I
Mm.
mean, just she loves you, but telling people what to do, snapping your fingers and all that. I said that works at the office, but they don't work for you. They're your family. So sometimes that's the first thing I find, because a lot of the women that do this are really hard on themselves, and they just try harder. So I'm going to work harder. That tends to make it worse.
Yeah. And I think you have to also prioritize what's important to you and letting
Mhm.
the other person see that you're making that sacrifice. Because I know I am attracted to someone who's driven, and my husband is a very, very strong worker, hard worker. But there are times where I need him to make time for the family, I need him to make time for date night, and I prioritize that. But I think in our relationship, we maneuver in a different way, because I just have to give him a lot of leg room. Like,
Mhm.
hey, 2 weeks notice, I need you to show up for
Mhm.
me on this day in this capacity, or I need you, to plan the next date night because I did the last one, or something to that extent. It's like I've learned, because we've been married for almost 17 years this year and we dated for 5. So we've been together a while, but my communication wasn't that clear, and
Mhm.
I'm sure everyone can relate to this, in the beginning, right?
Mhm.
Like I was growing and maturing in who I am, what I want, what I need. And he was doing the same thing. But as a couple, we've had to learn to communicate, and even the small things, because, he had to tell me and show me that he's not a mind reader. And I might have this whole plan planned out in my head. And if I get mad at him for not executing it the way I expected, that's on me if I didn't communicate my expectations. I think another thing I've had to do is not hold on to the how and be satisfied with the result, right?
Mhm.
So, in our relationship, for example, especially anyone who has kids might relate to this, right? Like you have a kid, you have a way that you think the kid should be fed, bathed, and put to bed, right? Maybe you have your bedtime routine, right? And then your partner comes in and they do it completely different, turn it upside down, but the kids still get to bed on time. Do you get upset with them because they do it differently, or do you accept the fact that they accomplished the goal and they did it in a way that works for them? I think that's like something that comes with relationships and could even come with money, right? Because you have to figure out what works for them. So even in budgeting with a partner or spending money with a partner, knowing how they go about saving successfully is one way that you can ensure that you both save, but maybe that person needs to put money aside every paycheck, or, at the end of each week, and then you might be the person who can be a little more disciplined, so you do it every time you sit down and do your budgeting numbers. So there's just different ways to do it, but the goal is the same. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
It does make sense. And as you're saying this, I'm thinking in terms of that money is really power. Couples don't always want to think that way. I say, but it is. And you'll know this when one person starts to withhold money. Then you'll really feel powerless. And I
Mm-hmm.
like what you're talking about is actually talking it out and let's have a plan and how do we set aside and we're doing this as a team
Mm-hmm.
so that then that power struggle doesn't come up. Because
Yeah.
if it does, then the emotions kick in, the resentment kicks in, we start a spiral. It sounds like you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Yes, and it's easy to do. It's easy to I say easy. I mean, it's quite fixable because we're. I love your approach. How you're talking about folks working as a team and doing
Mm-hmm.
stuff together. And if that doesn't happen, that's usually when the bad stuff starts happening. It may start small, but
Exactly.
it'll build up.
Exactly, exactly. No, you totally do get it. So, I want to talk about attraction, right? Because I'm sure for your clients who you are helping to get to a relationship where they result in marriage, or at least more dating options, what are some of the tips you give them to attract the person that they want?
So the first thing, if I'm talking with someone, is I want to find out who is their guy and who's a right fit for them. And sometimes what they're going after, it isn't just they shouldn't date him as much as he's not a good fit. So if she's driven and she's really accomplished and she really likes a driven man, I know we talked about this, some of your husband. If he's really similar with her, the problem with that is it becomes too competitive because we're familiar with each other and we don't complement each other. So it works great when we're going together. But when there's a disagreement or a different way of doing it, like you said about the different ways of putting a child to bed, it shows up in areas like that. And
Mhm.
then they're like, oh, why can't I make it work? Well, was that really a good fit for you? And then if they know what they want, I ask women, I say, can we give this 2 or 3 dates early on? And I don't mean force it to happen. Some men are just not good at dating. Doesn't mean they wouldn't be a great husband, but they're a little clunky. That they're there's one wife I'm thinking of, and she told me this a few years ago when the internet got going, and she said, if my husband had to fill out an online profile, she goes, he'd still be single. She goes, yeah, he's wonderful. She goes, but he's awful at stuff like that. And there's more men, they're better now, but they're just not good at that. So, the profiles or the first impressions, that may or may not be an accurate representation. And probably the third thing I ask women to do is As I say, can we slow it down early on? Can we just make it a point just to not rush? I know you're really excited because a man that's not long term oriented will not tolerate you slowing him down. Will not tolerate if you don't see him all the time, really quick. He's really obsessed with how intense it is. And the more intense it is with a man early on, the more likely there's going to be a crash. I mean, it's similar as we're thinking like if I've years ago bet a lot on a stock tip, whatever, and just put all my money into it and it just ratchets it up. Oh, this is going to go on forever. And then it crashes. And so we don't want that in a relationship too, because it works in the same way.
Wow, that was an aha moment for me. I never really considered that. So I'm gonna definitely share this episode with my single girlies because the intention behind dating, and if we slow it down versus speed it up, what will happen is it weeds out the
Mm-hmm.
bad apples, right? And I think, at least in my circle of friends, if you're still dating over 40, you are dating with the intent to get married, versus some people may not want marriage, but they're telling you they want it. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that's interesting too. So you can see their real intentions based on their actions when the relationship is going at a particular pace.
Mm-hmm.
But something else you said really struck me, which was men are not always good at dating. And I never thought about
Mm-hmm.
that, but you might be onto something there, because if someone's not good at planning dates or figuring out, how to make them special, it just might not be their thing. And I've had a lot of women who say, I always have to plan the dates, or I
Mm-hmm.
always have to plan the trips. And then when they have surrendered that responsibility to their partner, it has gone terribly. And I just thought it was just them. I never really considered the possibility that some people just are not built to do that well, or their brain just doesn't, execute that well. But they have been good fathers, good supportive systems, good husbands, good providers. So it's so funny you say that. And I think if that is something women notice, maybe they should lean into that, right? Like, you could still date that person and get to know them and see if that's someone you want to marry, but maybe you plan most of the dates. Like, maybe you do a 95-5 split, you know?
Now, I like how pragmatic you're being, and especially when we were talking before in your own marriage, is that it's a little different for each couple. Now, I think
Mhm.
it's important you know those core things are important to you. I mean, I think for you, someone that you respected, every woman wants that. But I know
Mhm.
talking to you, that's a big deal with you. The way you talked about growing up is that I've got to have a
Mhm.
man I really respect,
Mhm.
and so if a woman knows her core things, then like you said, I can work around the other stuff. I can, as long as I get those core things that are really important to me, whatever those traits are. But her knowing those is what's so important, because then is how she can say, "Well, I got what I really wanted. I can work on the rest. I can. Once we get married, I can dress him. I can take him
Right.
shopping.
Mhm.
Things like that. Men don't mind. It's if you try to change our core character that we don't like."
Mm, I like what you said. So basically, if I don't like the way you dress, we can go clothes shopping.
Mm-hmm.
But if I don't like your morals or your values,
Mm-hmm.
we should not be
Yeah.
dating,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
I think that's clear, but I do think some women try to rebuild the man instead of finding the person that aligns with them,
Mm-hmm.
both, mentally, physically, and spiritually. But that
Mm-hmm.
is a really, really good point. I do think most men don't mind looking better or
Mm-hmm.
feeling more attractive to their
Mm-hmm.
partner, but I could see some of them being stuck in their way as far as character, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they feel that is a core part of their personality and you shouldn't change that. And so that makes sense to me. That makes a lot of sense to me. So on that same note, like, what's one common mistake women make that pushes men away?
So the most common one I see is it's more like a technique. Is they ask a question, it sounds like a question, which is, "Don't you want to go to the store with me?" And the person says, "Not really." Well, why not? And teenagers taught me this because it would drive them crazy when their parents would ask them stuff and they would answer because it really wasn't a question. It's called a
Hmm.
leading question. And men know what you're doing, and it's irritating. It depends on the mood I'm in, because I think women do that because it's vulnerable to say what I really want. I'd really like you to go to the store with me. I really wish you would do this. Or, when you get upset and raise your voice, that doesn't feel good. That sometimes they say it sounds weak, but If a man responds poorly to that, pay attention. If you're authentic, that's kind of a red flag. If you're being authentic and he just doubles down and gets more aggressive or keeps doing it or get over it, because that tends to reveal a man's character when you're authentic about what you're feeling, what you like. And it's so uncomfortable that you're not going to do it with everything. So I'm not worried about someone overdoing it because it's awkward.
Mhm.
But if I can get them to do that, what they'll notice is they'll say, "Oh, that feels scary." Yes, but he'll feel that, and that makes you more real, and it makes you actually more desirable. It makes you more attractive. It may not feel that way, but to us, it's a sign of confidence that you can show that to someone.
That is so good. That is so good. And I think that as women, sometimes, especially professional women who lead in the office, who are leaders in their space, they have this desire to exercise authority, right? But they want you to think it's your idea or feel like you're on board with it too. But I
Mhm.
think that that goes back to what I said about communication is being clear. If you want somebody to go to the store with you, don't ask them if they want to go. Start with, I would love for you to do this with me. Would you like to go? So then it lets them know this is something she desires. And if I can do it, I will. But if she's genuinely asking me, do I want to go to the grocery store? My husband's answer is always going to be no, right? Like he could care. He,
Right.
he doesn't
Uh-huh.
care about the grocery store. That
Uh-huh.
is not his
Uh-huh.
favorite place to be. So you do have to communicate to an extent what it is you want and not anticipate or expect them to know that's what you want. I think that's key. And it's hard because Hollywood will tell you, oh, manipulate people to think it was their idea.
Mhm.
That's how you get what you want. But like you said, men know what you're doing and they don't necessarily like it. Now, I'm doing a light scenario where it's grocery shopping, but what if that's about kids? Or what if that's about an inheritance? Like that's a more serious discussion that you could be trying to present in a way that you want them to do what you want them to do, right? Without being clear, this is your, desire, right? Or this is your expectation. And those types of things can make or break a relationship because a lot of people, kids are a deal breaker if they don't want them or they do want them. Or if you came into a lot of money in your relationship, how you handle it, that could be a deal breaker because maybe you have an expectation. Say it's your partner who gets the inheritance that they're going to spend it on you or they're going to spend it on your finances together, and they may have an expectation that they don't have to share it, but you have to communicate that clearly. So I think that's super important, and I really like what you said. So I have my opinion based on the clients that I've helped to bring their finances together. But what's your honest opinion? How do you think money affects dating and relationships?
I think it reveals kind of who you are. And so if if I'm a man with money, do I let the woman I'm interested in influence me, her preferences, or do I, hold on to that and make it where that's just my area and it doesn't influence that we're going to the cheapest places or doing the things, doing it my way. Conversely, I tell men like in dating, I'm like, don't lead with money. I said, don't do that. I said, you're hiding behind it. Let her get to know you for who you are, and the money stuff can come up later. But I like the examples you gave about, if we're not honest and like an inheritance, because I don't know that money has to be a big deal unless someone makes it a huge deal. I mean, it's one aspect of our life, but it's not the main thing. I mean, people that have poor health will tell you this. Your health is awful. You may need money for medical stuff, but you're not thinking about making more money. You're just trying to breathe. And so, what I'm after, especially for women, is that your success is not who you are. I mean, it's what you've accomplished. Be proud of it. You've earned it by all means, but it's not. We don't want to be known for that primarily. It's just one of the things that you do. And so you not integrating that to everything and you're not focused on that gives a man a chance to get to know you and get to appreciate you for who you are. And then your accomplishments are like a bonus on top of that. That's something you can both do together. But if you're scared or nervous or family member's sick or your parents are elderly, the money isn't going to matter as much as someone that will listen to you. Someone that'll actually pay attention and wants, what can I do to be helpful? I always think in terms of character things override money things, or character things
Mm.
override charisma. Because in the long term, that's what you're really going to want, whether you may think so now or not.
That is so good. Yeah, I think that's some really good insight. And so to kind of follow up to that, do you think what do you tell women who are dating someone who makes less than them? And do you think that women should reconsider, or if money is an important factor for them, let that person go?
I've got someone, she just got married. She's an attorney. I mean, not attorney, she's a doctor, medical director. So she makes more than him. And she really loves him. And it's not an issue unless someone wants to make it one, as in why, what I'll ask women is they'll make X amount of money. And I go, what is it you want with that money? I mean, what is it do you want to travel a lot? What is it? And they'll tell me what they really want. And it's okay, do we need all this money to do that, or is there another way? In other words, it's the only way we do this if he makes as much as you,
Mhm.
which means most of the time it's not that, it's more of a status thing and the meaning they've given to it.
I
And
see
I
that.
I had one woman I was talking to, and she wanted me to help her find a husband. So I'm asking what she wanted. She says, I want to marry a billionaire. A billionaire. Why not 100 million? No, a billionaire. Well, I mean, there aren't that many billionaires, number one, but I'm like, it's not the money. There's just a thing she's got attached to it. I'm like, that's going to put pressure. He could be awful, but he's a billionaire. And she doesn't really know what she really likes. She just wants a billionaire. And so if we get fixated with that, then I think we're losing track of just the whole person. And then a lot of times they're stuck if it's just he has to make a certain amount, especially if I say why. And they have a hard time answering why because he should, or it just makes me feel better. So I always like to drill down with that.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I think that when you take money out of the equation, because that can come and go. I mean, we've seen so many layoffs lately with in sectors we never thought would lay off. So you having a six-figure or seven-figure job today might be very different 3, 4, or 5 years from now. So I do think is the person is important. I think the character, we talked a lot today about character is important, and then asking yourself why, right? So cuz I like what you said, is the why because you want to travel, is the why because you want to be able to invest a certain amount of money each year? What value would that particular salary have to your relationship? So I think that's a really, really good perspective. And I never thought about it that way. So that's really good. So, what's one thing you think when it comes to money? So, what money habit have you noticed helps couples stay together longer and stronger?
So my favorite one, and I usually have to tell them because I haven't heard it, and it's from a book called The Richest Man in Babylon. I'm sure you've read that. And they would have this thing about the egg basket. And what I tell them to do, especially if it is a fun thing to do, is I say take a sock, or take something. And every month you put a certain amount of cash in that. So it's just fun. I said, but you never touch it. You never touch that. And then it grows. It may start be $50 one month and $100 the next. And we're doing something together. It's like a game. And then once it gets to a certain amount, then let's put it into a savings account, because now we've learned how not to, as a couple, not just individually, not touch it, because there's always
Mhm.
going to be stuff that comes up. And we're building up a muscle. And so if they can do this together, and then again, once you get a certain amount in savings, now you're ready to invest it. And because they've grown up learning how to protect, they've grown together to learn to protect it. And things will come up, and they'll get to see how each other reacts. And when the other person says, let's touch that, and the other says, no, no, we promise not to, remember? And they get to learn a lot of skills together. And so it's a fun game. But what it teaches both of them is it shows them not to give in to impulse control. Because I find that poor impulse control tends to lead to poor money flow, and then
Mm.
more poor money savings and poor money everything.
Yes, poor impulse control leads to poor money flow. Yes, I love that. That is so, so true. Bob, this has been awesome. I really liked your perspective on money and relationships, and then giving us some of your coaching tips. But before we wrap up, I have to ask you my second signature question, which is, what is your purpose of money? That's the name of the podcast. So we ask everyone, what's your purpose for money?
So my purpose is to take care of those people that I love. I like to think in terms of my purpose is to be what I call a grain keeper. Going back to Joseph in the Bible, and his thing was, to take care of everyone else. His wisdom and all that wasn't to hoard as much as it was to protect. So I've always taken that approach with me and my family, and that enables me to be generous too with charities or folks that I think I could be helpful to.
I love that. And I love Joseph's story because he definitely went from a path least expected, right? He had a dream that he would be the ruler of a nation, right? And his brothers, out of jealousy, sold him into slavery. But it was selling him into slavery and him going to prison, where he actually found the ability to share his interpretation of dreams with the Pharaoh, who put him in a position where not only did he help Egypt save for a famine, but he helped save lives, right? And I actually talked about this with my son recently
Mm,
because he had a very powerful dream, and I wanted to talk to him about it and tell him that dreams are not always just dreams. Sometimes they are very important messages that guide the trajectory of your life. And so you really need to honor them. And we talked about the story of Joseph, and he was so in awe because he said, you know, Joseph never imagined that he would have to go through so much struggle and suffering, right? Slavery, prison, to get to his reward. But in the end, in his position of power, he was able to help his brothers and
mm,
forgive his brothers and just give them a legacy beyond measure, right? Beyond what they ever expected. And so that is a wonderful way to end this podcast
mhm.
because for those of you who are dreaming about your next relationship or even marriage, Bob is a great resource to help coach you to that solution and outcome. But just know that sometimes you might struggle on the dating bus for a while until you find your partner. So, thank you so much, Bob, for being here today. Before we wrap up, please let everyone know, how do we connect with you? What's your website? What's your social media handles? Because I know people are going to hear this and want to reach out.
Thanks, Gwen. I am at relationshipheadquarters.com. And for the ladies, I have a free gift. It's called What Men Find Irresistible. It's a lot of the stuff that we've talked about here. It's a quick read, but I think you'll find it's insightful. And then I have a podcast also at Bob Grant, the Relationship Headquarters. And then you'll see me on social media at Bob Grant, Instagram, and YouTube.
That is so good. Thank you so much, guys. You know what to do. Reach out to Bob if you're interested in working with him. Check out his freebie. We'll make sure to drop a copy for the link in the show notes. And until next time, keep building generational wealth. Bye bye.